because this is St. Cloud mostly, right, and some other cities, do you feel like you see racial, economic disparities? Like, is justice blind in your experience?
I guess I don't know. So St. Cloud has a growing Somali population it's grown incredibly fast in the past 10 years. With that does come certain tensions, but I think it actually works out fairly well, and our police are trained really well in how to deal with cultural differences. So I don't find that particularly to be a problem. One cultural thing that we have a unique issue with in St. Cloud is what's called sovereign citizens. Have you guys ever dealt with sovereign citizens before? Heard of it before? This is going to be a fascinating day on YouTube for you someday. So sovereign citizens, they come in all different types. Sometimes they're referred to as posse comitatus or sons of Israel, or they have all different types of names depending on what they believe in. They're basically the people who believe that they are a nation in themselves. They are not bound by the government's rules. And so we can't make them have things like driver's licenses or insurance on their vehicles, or we can't make them drive sober, or you name it. They believe in it. And so they're at a point when you believe as an individual that you are your own nation. There's a point where there's nothing I can say to get across to you why I'm prosecuting you for this traffic crime. And so that to me is the much harder boundary to cross than any cultural divide that I deal with day to day.
How often does that show up? How many?
A lot.
Really?
We deal with quite a number of them. Yeah. I don't know why it's particular to our area. I've talked to other prosecutors about it too. We happen to have quite a few sovereign citizens up there, and sometimes it can be entertaining. Most of the time it's incredibly painful for everybody involved because they won't even recognize the authority of the court, for example. So when their name is called and their case is ready, they won't come up to counsel table and have their case heard. They will sit in the back. Or they'll say, I'm not Lacy Schumacher, I am the estate of Lacy Schumacher, or I'm representing the decedent Lacy Schumacher, or some other nonsense jargon that they learned on the internet that they think is going to get this ticket dismissed.
And what usually ends up happening?
They get convicted, but we have to have a trial, and they always represent themselves, and it's always kind of a nightmare.
So do they have state IDs or anything like that? So how do they get into the system? I mean, if they're truly sovereign.
And some do, some don't. Like I said, because they have this crazy anarchic belief system, they can't even have a formal group of themselves because they don't believe in any sort of formal organization. So, which is also why it's so hard to deal with, because it's a different belief system day to day depending on who you're dealing with. So a lot of them have driver's licenses. They tend to be either revoked, suspended, canceled, or expired. And
some reason why they decided they were sovereign.
But they still drive on our roads, right? So they believe in that, but not.
But what they believe is here's where it gets interesting.
Maybe I need to go on YouTube more.
So here's your con law 101, right? So they know that the Constitution gives you the right to travel. They know that. They don't know what that means though, because they think that it means that they get to use the roads without having to be burdened by a driver's license or proof of insurance or the appropriate headgear on a motorcycle, for example. Not realizing that the right to travel means something vastly different from that it means you can go state to state and have the same rights, right? They think that it means you don't have to have a driver's license. There's no .08 limit for DWIs. You can't make me do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There was one case that I had where one of them was stopped for not having eye gear on his motorcycle. His license was suspended and he didn't have insurance, of course. And the trooper that stopped him was trying to explain this to him. You have to have a license, you have to have insurance. And the guy goes, no, I'm a paralegal. I know that I don't have to have insurance. I have the right to travel. I can come teach you and your coworkers if you want me to. I don't know how the trooper kept a straight face in the situation. He did, but he didn't take him up on the offer to have him come teach that.
No, honestly, these guys sound kind of cool. If any of you are listening, I mean, you're probably too sovereign to have the internet, but please come in for an interview.
We'd love to have.
Have you seen any really
have
dangerous thing? I mean, if they think like murder is legal, or do you see any of those kind of cases?
So no, I haven't seen that specific case, but there is one particular sovereign citizen that has sent what we deemed as a credible death threat to our office, and so we did what you would always do in a death threat situation, and we just trespassed him from the building. It doesn't seem super effective to me, to someone who doesn't believe in laws, but whatever. It kept him out anyway, but we still had to deal with him at court because he wasn't trespassed from court and he had active cases going. So I would still have to go to court and meet with him, which is not exciting. But there is actually, I think it's still on the Minnesota Law Library website. The Minnesota Law Library offers free CLEs, and there's an on-demand one about sovereign citizens and some of the financial aspects of being a sovereign citizen, which is a subject for a whole nother podcast someday. But
yes,
I think we could have a podcast just on sovereign citizens.
It is, and I could talk about it all day long. I love them. I'm obsessed with them. But the law library has a CLE on from a woman who works for the Department of Corrections about kind of her encounters with sovereign citizen inmates. It's a 1 credit CLE. I think it's on YouTube, and I think it's still on the CLE website, so you can find it. But it's fascinating, and it's another kind of aspect of being a sovereign citizen.
These are the "Am I being detained?" guys?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I love those guys.
They're pretty great.
Yeah.
And so I want to get back to law school, and
Sure.
specifically how much you got out of law school, and what classes you liked, what classes you didn't like, and kind of in general, how did you like your time at Hamlin?
Yeah, I loved Hamlin. I was one of those very involved law students so I wrote for the Journal of Public Law and Policy. I was the social chair for the Student Bar Association. I was involved in a bunch of different groups. I was clerk of the rolls for Delta Theta Phi, the law fraternity that we had. I don't know if any of this is still in existence now at Mitchell Hamlin.
I mean, I'm a representative on SBA, so
Hey,
it
SBA
works
at
out.
least exists. That's good. So I was.
What was that, Hannah? Go ahead.
I was one of those like very involved people. So I went to Hamlin for the atmosphere. I really liked the professors and the older students that I had met there, and so that was kind of probably my favorite part of it. Classes that I took that I really loved: immigration law from Julie Zimmer. I think everyone should take immigration law, even if you're not interested in it, just because it touches almost every other area of the law, whether you're going to go into family law or criminal on either side. Tax, it's a piece of everything. Business, you'll deal with visas. And so immigration law is one I would really recommend everyone to take if you can. Or just go sit down and talk to an immigration attorney. Sometime they probably need someone to talk to right now.
Yeah.
Other than that, what else did I take that I really loved? I had a mental health law class that I really enjoyed that was taught by a woman who is a registered nurse and a JD. Her name is Barbara Lindbergh. That class was really fascinating. We talked about civil commitments a lot and some of the issues surrounding that. What else did I love that it seems so long ago.
How was your con law class? Because Hannah and Anthony, they just rave about their con law class.
I took both con law 1 and 2. I don't know how they do it now. We had it split up into 2 semesters. Con law 1 was required, con law 2 was not. My first one was taught by Mary Jane Morrison, who is probably one of the preeminent experts, maybe in the United States, certainly in Minnesota, on constitutional law. She's actually helped draft other countries' constitutions, which is kind of insane.
Wow.
We had her write an article for the Journal of Public Law and Policy and about a couple constitutional law issues that were coming up, and so she wrote this amazing article, and there would be a couple sentences that were facts without citations. So we'd say, "Hey, professor, where'd you get that from?" And she'd be like, "I just know it." And we'd be like, "Okay, I
But she's
guess.
credible enough that she can cite herself as just being that.
Guess that's all I got. Good deal. I don't know what the blue book for that is, but all right." And then my Con Law 2 class was Marie Falinger, who I think is still a professor here. And that was fantastic. It was a ton of reading. She did the big Dean Chemerinsky book, and we read a ton for that class, but I loved it. I liked it a lot more than I liked Con Law 1, which is not Mary Jane Morrison's fault at all. I just was more into the issues in Con Law 2.
So it's consensus to come on one, just kind of sucked all around.
That's one of those classes. A lot of the first year classes, though, they stay so deep in the theory of the law, and they stay out of the actual practice of it, that it's really hard to wrap your head around, like, why does this matter to me now? Even like when I think back to my criminal law course, I loved my professor for criminal law. I was terrified of him. It was Peter Thompson. And thinking back on it now, I just think, what did I even learn from that class? Because it was so deeply theoretical. We talked about retributive versus rehabilitative justice and why that should matter. And that was the central theme of our course. And I get it. But at the same time, like, give me the black letter law, man.
Right.
Do
First
you
year,
feel like
say
that
that's what
doesn't
they want.
apply as a prosecutor? That you don't find yourself like thinking about?
So
you don't have like a clear philosophy in that way in your mind.
So I think it applies in a big picture way, but in the day-to-day, I don't think that those types of theories apply as much. I think that when you're thinking of maybe how to improve the criminal justice system in a larger sense, that's exactly how we should think about it. But that's where it's hard, because everyone does have a different view of whether it should be retributive or whether it should be rehabilitative.
Yeah. How do you feel about criminal justice reform in general? You think everything's like peachy?
So, no. I mean, the system that we have is the system that we have right now. It's one of those things, like when you talk about like democracy or capitalism as a whole, like, it's not very good, but everything else is pretty terrible too. This seems to be like working even if it's kind of broken. And so it's hard to think outside of that. There's always things to improve, which is why every legislative update, things get a little bit better for one reason or another. One of the improvements that just came out, or what I think is an improvement, is that the legislature just changed the DUI laws to include intoxicating substances as a new DUI crime. So prior to this, it went into effect on August 1st. Prior to this, if you had been huffing while driving and got into a car accident, or just were huffing while driving and, driving all over the road, that's not a DUI crime. It's not punishable as a DUI. Huffing is punishable as a misdemeanor. Your driving infractions are punishable as various misdemeanors, but there's no DUI portion of it. That's not driving while impaired. While huffing itself makes people insane. We have a lot of huffing cases where I practice too.
Like computer dusters?
Like computer duster, yep, like whippets, that whole thing. We have a ton of huffing cases. There was actually just a car wreck where what they think happened is that a guy was huffing, got into a car wreck, and he actually killed a couple of people. Not a DUI at the time, because it happened, I think, at the beginning of July or end of June. And so that's one of those improvements that's made, because the Supreme Court had found that the inhalants were not hazardous substances, which is what the prior DUI law had said. The legislature reacts and says, well, we still want to criminalize this behavior. So they change it to intoxicating substances and add different language to what drugs are prohibited. Then you get a new law on what's actually DUI.
So like you said for computer dusters, the chemicals and whatever that goes into it is not a hazardous chemical?
Yeah.
That's what you said.
So
Mr. Asbestos.
there's a Minnesota statute that defines what hazardous chemicals are, and not all of the inhalants were included in that statute at the time. That has been enlarged, and then the name of the particular subdivision of the DUI statute changed from hazardous substance to intoxicating substance.
So if you were inhaling a hazardous substance, you would just be charged under a hazardous thing. It wasn't hazardous, and DUI wasn't in the same realm of law.
No, so there's like various ways you get a DUI. Most common one is alcohol 0.08 or more, right? Then there's controlled substances, then there's marijuana, then there's hazardous substances. Hazardous substances before was any sort of combination of things that you're not supposed to be ingesting, that you did ingest and made you impaired. Think hazardous chemicals with that.
Okay.
They changed it to intoxicating substances to make it more aligned with the use of inhalants, which still leads to DUI offenses, if that makes sense. So they expand the definitions of what substances are considered intoxicating to answer the Supreme Court, and then they expand the definition of the DUI law itself.
So, Lacy, where do you see your career leading to in the future? Do you see, either becoming a prosecutor for more maybe more advanced